Welcome back, everyone, to another episode. Today, we are speaking with Maaria Mozaffar. Maaria is founder and CEO of AWF Global, a global motivational speaker, published author, legislative attorney, and policy developer. And I couldn't have had this conversation that we're going to have today about policy with someone better than Maaria. Maaria, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. And folks, we're going to be speaking about the impacts of policy for leaders. As a senior enlisted leader in the Navy, I often found that policy was one of those things that often was the instigator of problems because they were not well written. They weren't thought out before they were actually put into place. And then something happens. And then we have this, chaos control going. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about you, Maaria.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. I mean, you described the different hats that I wear. So I have quite a few different hats. And also, I have a family. So that's the most important role I play. But I think what's important to bring, what I can bring into the discussion is to understand the gaps that I've seen in power structures when policies are made, and how many people in this country do not know the gaps of information that policymakers or elected officials, I would say, have, or blind spots. And you're correct. Many times these policies are made and then they affect a subgroup or a group of people that somehow are not covered or assisted or helped, or to their detriment is the impact of the policy. And that doesn't come to light until a group of people say, hey, this isn't working for us. This isn't working for our neighborhood or our kids. But I also think that there's another reality that we need to understand, and that it's not just the fact that there are gaps of information, but many times a lot of communities are overlooked. And maybe there's implicit bias, and maybe it's 100% deliberate. And to have good policy, we need to be able to hit the target when we're talking about reforming policy and coming up with better policy to solve problems. We can't dance around the issue of why some policies are not serving the people that they need to serve.
Absolutely. And you bring up a good point. And one of the questions as you was talking, what gaps do exist in policy making? Because we're not seeing it.
Right. So I've developed policy at the state level and at the federal level currently. That's what I'm doing. And the gaps in information are, number one, understanding the diversities of the communities that make up this country. That is number one. There is such a miscommunication, misunderstanding, disinformation about different communities and how they think and what they are and what their priorities are. And it's almost as if the information that has been fed to elected officials are the most convenient or simplified, but the world is nuanced. Communities are nuanced. Humans are nuanced. And we have to be able to, if we want to address these issues or serve constituents, we need to be able to speak in nuances. I don't think you can simplify issues to win elections. It's worked before. But then when you're actually rolling up your sleeves and trying to solve problems, it's all nuanced. And I have met a lot of elected officials that really appreciate nuance, are hungry for nuance, but somehow they didn't have access to just understanding the different dimensions of a community. And then there are others that are very comfortable not seeing the nuance. No, this is what I believe. This is what I read. This is what I heard. This is what we're going to do, and we're moving on. And this is what the majority of my constituents believe too. And then one would question, no, 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 but it's not the right approach, and it's an inaccurate assessment of how you're describing a certain situation. Yeah, but let's move on, right? So, and I recognize this a lot, and I always feel like one has to decide, every elected official that is implementing policy or bringing policy forth, you have the decision every time to decide if you're going to lead. So, because you represent, but you also lead. And if there are things and ideas in your constituency that is not accurate, that could be ignorant or driven by hate or driven by ignorance, your position to lead is to take everybody to a higher level of understanding. Some people are not interested in that. Let's just try to be in a position that will protect our seat. So I'm always inspired when I meet elected officials that believe in discussing in depth and nuances and want to open the door to learn more about different communities, because they can be the bridge to the constituencies that are divided by bringing people together.
As leader, I know that I've looked at policies before they were enacted, and
Mm-hmm.
have been able to look at it, step away, and then look at the complement that we had in order to right size that policy before it actually became paper and went out to the masses. So I was fortunate to have that type of training and exposure for myself. But how can leaders out there now become more mindful of the nuances when they are creating these policies?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. And we're talking about leaders in a lot of different capacities, right? We have organization leaders, we have business leader, non-for-profit leaders, elected officials. And I have my hands in a lot of different spaces. So I've seen this quite a bit. And I would say that across the board, the number one question that each leader needs to understand is what problem you are trying to solve. Because you have to be very honest and direct about that, right? What problem are you trying to solve? And when you're able to answer that question, what problem you're trying to solve, then like a spokes on a wheel, there are different aspects of that problem that come up that are multidimensional. So that means paragraph after paragraph after paragraph. If this happens, we also got to address this, but this may happen, or this could affect a certain employee this way, right? All the different things that we want to think about. And if you look at history in this country, a lot of the legislations that were historic came about because people and communities were overlooked, right? If you look at the working mom, paid family leave, individuals that are wanting to care for the elderly, their parents. How do you balance all of that? Individuals that have disabilities, how is it for them to be in the workplace? And these are all things that nobody thought about when they were implementing policy for a large community that has many different types of people. And so when you're saying you want to try to solve a problem, you have to solve the problem for all of those people in those communities. I think this idea, and unfortunately it's just so unfair, but this idea of, well, and we talk about this in town halls and stuff, right? When we discuss how do we change and how do we make change? Well, if you make enough noise, you'll change. If you make enough noise and you come together, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? You have all these statements, and these statements, unfortunately, are true, but they're only true because when the policy was made, there was also a mindset of, I don't know if that's really a large of a concern right now, right? I think if there's one individual that has a disability that is not being treated well in a certain environment, that one should be written into the policy. But the way we operate is if you get 500 signatures, if you get 1,000 people to prove that this is important, then we'll make a change. And that's the difference between leading and not leading. Because when you're leading, you don't need 1,000 people to tell you, oh, okay, you guys do exist, right? What you want to do is, well, what if a certain person was in this situation? I think we should have a provision for that too. And I think it's a different way of looking at it. One thing I always speak about is that the policies that we put in should always result in some sort of mercy for somebody, even if your goal is efficiency or the bottom line. If your goal is efficiency in the bottom line, but it results in hardship for somebody, then you're not going to get to the bottom line, right? Because you're going to have tons of challenges. People are going to be unhappy. They're going to push back. They're going to ask for your resignation. They're going to ask the board why this is happening. So if you implement mercy, how can this result in the human beings that are impacted feel like there is mercy among their environment, in their communities, in their business, in their workplace? Then I think we go a lot further. And that's not a numbers game.
Now, sometimes policies are in place and you have an opportunity to realize, hey, we didn't include this group. So
Right.
how can we recover as leaders or policymakers from policies that don't include a solution for everyone?
Number one, I think we have to recognize that we all know that behind every office and every institution and every organization, even though we're seeing press releases and official statements, there are humans. And I think as leaders, we need to be able to be very clear on what caused the gap in information and recognize that there's value to owning up to that. You know, we have these big PR strategies and these big PR campaigns, and people get paid a lot of money to control people's words so they're not held accountable. And I think that's the difference between leading too. You use words where you're not misunderstood. You use words where you're not assuming liability when you're not liable, but you speak to your responsibility. I mean, let's walk through that conversation. Let's say there's a group that comes and says, you didn't even think of us. Like, it's unbelievable. It's almost like we're invisible. And there is that's a terminology a lot of communities use, the invisible communities, right? We want to marginalize or invisible communities. So let's say there's a community that comes to you and you're a leader and they say, you didn't see it. It's almost like we're invisible. And as a leader, what would your response be? And your response would be, I can't believe I missed this. I mean, because you're human. I can't believe I missed this. What can I do to take it to where we need to go? Tell me what your needs are. Tell me what your needs are. Tell me what you need so I can figure out what is doable. That's a problem solver versus someone who's trying to protect their reputation and protects their um, their accountability piece, right? So I think leadership and policy are two things. One thing is talking in nuance, appreciating that nuance. And second is to be able to take accountability when there's been a blind spot. And when I meet any leader that can do those two things, they're very successful.
Great points indeed. Now, if there was one thing that you can encourage leaders to implement today to help them create great policies, what would that be?
I would say listen more and talk less. I think that would be the number one advice I would give, because we all have presumed knowledge of our of our own, and we feel like we understand sensibilities and understand situations, but there may be many blind spots that you didn't see coming. So I think really the most important thing is to be able to listen and take in information and then give yourself some time. I mean, some of the most problematic legislations in this country have happened in crisis. They've happened in times of fear, misunderstanding, and we've paid heavy, heavy prices as a country because of it. And I would say the country has paid a heavy price. Human beings have paid a heavy price. So, there are certain, as you yourself, your background, you understand, there are some urgent situations that require military decisions. Um, and so that in itself is different. But even in those cases, precision and nuance yields the best results, even in that. And that's not something that someone can say, oh, but we don't have time for that. We don't have time for that. But once you decide that you don't have time to make the best decision that you can by just looking at everything that you can look at from every angle, once you do that, you are opening yourself up to a lot of mistakes down the road. And I see that across the board. I mean, we have all these different leadership decisions that we've made, a lot of different policy decisions that people make. So there's many different levels, right? And I'm not equating all of them. I'm not equating even the urgency of all of them. But I am equating that what is driven by fear and what is driven by the necessity to make decisions quickly without listening to as many people as you can, I think across the board that would appeal to anyone.
I absolutely agree. About 4 years ago, I did a survey, and the number one thing that was required of leaders that most people are not seeing is the ability to listen. And I couldn't, Maria, agree with you anymore, because that is really where we get the heartbeat of our people. Now, it's interesting you mentioned the military aspect of decision making, and just to clarify for those that are listening and don't have a background in military, even our decision making, as hasteful as they may be in certain situations, has been drilled and trained on multiple times. So that decision, although it may look hasty because of the
Mhm.
time, has been trained to. And so
Mm.
I see that in the I would say the civilian counterpart side,
Mm.
they don't often train to some of those decisions that they have to make. And then, some things can go astray. Even in a military setting, some things can go astray, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But so just imagine having all that training and still having that opportunity to go astray is there. So
Mhm.
listening is definitely key. Now,
Mhm.
Maria, you're speaking, author, are doing legislation, policy, and all these things. So, what do you have coming up, and how can the folks listening get a hold of you?
Thank you. I would love to hear from people that are interested in policy and making impact. And I would be excited to plug them into the different places, because everybody needs good people that are willing to help. And there's different situations that require different types of assistance. So right now I'm working on a federal resolution and a substantive legislation to follow. I can't speak too much about it until it's introduced on the floor, but it is focused on recognizing the significance of diverse communities and their ability to be who they are, and their protection of freedom of speech, which is, an American protection. And I also am the CEO of AWF. And what that actually is a company that focuses on creating tech tools to help users have a positive interaction with digital technology and digital media. And one thing that we spoke about were the gaps in information of policymakers. And what I see, which I'm sure you can also state, is that this country has been divided based on information that they receive. The information that they received comes from algorithms, and it reaffirms their thoughts and their biases, and it results in larger echo chambers, and it's not crossing the divide. So I'm very interested through AWF to work on solving that problem. Not only breaking the echo chamber, but providing tools for individuals as they use digital media where they can protect themselves from the harmful, addictive nature of negative algorithms. Because, you know, what we talk of, all the dots connect, right? You have a healthy person, a positive, optimistic person who knows that the world is diverse and a beauty to discover. You take that person, they become an extremely valuable community member. They become an extremely valuable family member. And so all of those pieces are connected to how that individual feels. Our community is based on how one individual feels. And yeah, I'd love to hear from people through LinkedIn. They can connect with me on LinkedIn and tell me what policies they are fascinated to learn about or what policies they want to implement. You know, I'm not an elected official. I draft legislations based on issues that I consider very important. And I know that there are many communities that do not have access to elected officials. And sometimes you need kind of the middle person. And any way that you can fill the gap for communities and people and contribute. I've met so many people and learned so many from so many people who contribute in different ways. This is just my way of contributing.
Well, we thank you for all you do, Maaria, in that aspect, because we do know that policymaking is something that's very critical, as we have just described throughout this episode, and it is important to get it right the first time. Um, I will have all of the information for you to get in contact with Maaria and talk to her about her book, and also include the links to her books in the show notes for you to be able to do that. Today's episode is sponsored by Fantail Services and Superpass, which are powering our website and app, Southern Sweet and Sassy Coffee, and Harchester, London. If you've enjoyed this episode and learned something interesting about the topic covered today, make sure to subscribe and let us know by leaving a comment right now. And we're always looking for new ideas and guests that can add to our show. So if you know someone or have a topic that you would like featured on the podcast or want to sponsor our show, we love to hear about it by emailing us at triadleadershipsolutions@gmail.com. And be sure to tune in next week for another episode where we dissect leadership from another angle. And as we like to end the show, success to you.